What's up, comrades? Lionel here, and as you can probably tell, it's a little echoey in here. I am off-site. I am not in my base of operations, as some of you may know. I am house-sitting. But I wanted to do another video discussing the Final Fantasy VII remake, and in particularly Tifa, because that's been the major contention and talking point that everybody wants to talk about. And we did a stream a couple nights ago about it, but there's been new information and new clarification, so I thought it would be a very good idea to kind of go over it a bit and kind of share some more thoughts on the situation, kind of clarify some things, or more importantly, clarifying what was misunderstood or mistranslated. Thanks to the wonderful person of Gaijinhunter here, who is a YouTube channel I am subscribed to. I don't watch his videos very often, mainly because I'm not as big of a Monster Hunter fan as others are, but I have seen his work before. He's very good at translating. He lives in Japan. He's also, I don't know if he works entirely as a translator or not, but I do know he does very good work when it comes to translating. He knows how to read Japanese, and he knows how to translate it, and translate it really well. So with this was his tweet from a day or 2 days ago. I'm annoyed by bad translations. So here's mine. Square Enix didn't tell them to shrink her boobs. They asked that they didn't use a clothing design that made them flop all over during action sequences to the point of being unnatural, considering that she is the active and / sporty type. And so he gives his translation, which is, I think, a bit more clear and understanding, and even leaves the text box of what was said, just so that it's more clarified of how he's translating it, which is appreciated. I don't speak Japanese, and I can't read Japanese, so, but I will say that I would give more credence to someone like this than secondhand information given to me either via Twitter or via other locations. I'm going to trust someone who's an actual translator opposed to somebody who might just be using Google Translate. I don't know who does the lead scans for Famitsu. I don't know how accurate those are. I think I mentioned that a while back, that some of that information might be inaccurate or misinterpreted. So I'm not sure. Sometimes it's better to wait and double check your sources. If you're going to be a news site and you're going to talk about this, best course of action is to make sure that you're double checking. And we'll get into that. And so the translation states is, question, did you refine the outfit design as well? Answer from Nomura. This time around, the visuals are pretty realistic, which is true. This is a graphical standard, which I have been mentioning for the last several days, that Square Enix has had for a long time. A lot of their characters now are more realistic. Their bodies are more proportionate to actual human beings, and they're not sprites. They're not 3D models like what would I say? Like 64-bit, like PS4 based graphics anymore, or not PS4, PS1 graphics. All their graphics are now up to date. All the characters look more in line with what real human bodies would technically look like. And I know there's going to be somebody who will probably make this statement of, are you saying that Tifa's boobs can't be as big as people, quote-unquote, believe them to be, and that those types of people don't exist? I'm not saying that those types of women don't exist. However, an AMV from, or not an AMV, but cutscenes from the original Final Fantasy VII from back in 1997, really not a good interpretation of the character, especially when you consider things like the box art or not the box art, but the art in the manuals, along with, the in-game combat model and the out-game combat models. There are 3 different models. We mentioned this in the first live stream when we discussed this. Piper brought it up. I brought it up. There are 3 different character models, each drastically different. in the game. There's 3 of those, but there's also the art from the stories themselves, or art from the manual itself, which is what Tifa is supposed to look like. And some people have pointed out that this, when you see a lot of these other characters, like back when I used to play Final Fantasy VII, I didn't look at Tifa in the cutscenes or when they're wandering around like in the outer world and whatnot. I didn't consider her designs or Cloud's or anybody's to be what they really look like in story wise. The way that they're supposed to look is what is depicted in the art for the game. The artistic renditions of the characters, that's what I'm looking at, and those are what they're supposed to look like in the game. They're not supposed to look like whatever the character models look like. Those are just there as kind of like a placeholder, and you need to use your imagination, much like you did with a lot of the older games. When you look at all sorts of games, and especially games that involve role-playing or fantasy, or even old games, old shooters and whatnot, you kind of have to use your imagination and kind of see characters the way they are in some of things like the box art or the manuals. Those are what you're supposed to believe, like, oh, so that's what that character looks like. Sometimes they do a terrible job, but that aside, for especially in older games, like for like the old Mega Man box art. But basically, you have to kind of consider imagination to be a huge factor in what the characters actually look like. Because in like old Final Fantasies, they were all just little tiny sprites with very little detail or definition. So the box art or the in-game manual art is what made you say, oh, so that's basically what this character looks like. That's what I'm going to go with when I'm playing the game. That said, his answer this time around pretty realistic, when we use actual clothing and accessories as reference when designing the outfits. I've heard people complaining that them using real world clothing, they're saying that it's an excuse. It's really not. Final Fantasy VII in particular, because it's post-apocalyptic and they use, I would say, kind of a pseudo-realistic world, not really in the sense of like the monsters and the magic, but things like they went steampunk. And yeah, it's kind of steampunk in a way, in the way that the city of Midgard is built. The people in it. Everybody's wearing, like, here's a good example. Shinra's agents, the Turks, they all wear business suits. All of them. They all wear business suits in a fantasy game. And I hear people complaining and arguing like, oh, you can't use, it's not fair to use real world clothing. Because that's basically how I interpret the argument. It's not fair to use real world combat or real world clothing to depict characters in a fictional setting. It's like, yes, if this was a purely 100%, actually, no, that's not how I'm going to word this. The way I'm going to word it is this. Even in older Final Fantasy games, or in any fantasy game, or any game that you are playing around with, or you're enjoying, they're going to take inspiration from actual real-world things. They're going to change it. They're going to make it be more appealing. They're going to give it a style. They're going to give it a look. But everything from whatever suits of armor you've ever seen in a fantasy game to any other type of weapons, all of them came from a source. They used real-world reference to make things. When you are an artist and you go out and you make something, like let's say you want to make a fictional gun. Let's say a science fiction-based gun. Like you want to make a laser rifle. Are you just going to just take it straight from your head and just randomly draw something? No. You're going to take actual real-world weapons, and you're going to take those weapons and you're going to change them to look more futuristic. That's how normally most art design works. You take something in the real world, which, by the way, normally that's what they teach you in art school first. They teach you how to draw real things, and then you get to stylize them afterwards. That's kind of how this works. So, when they were designing Tifa, they took inspiration from actual real-world things. Like, for example, it says, for Tifa's suspenders, we used military-type suspenders, which are very common, and something that definitely looks like they used. And for her gloves, we referenced both fighting and motorbike gloves. And when you look at her gloves in the actual game, yes, they definitely look like a mixture between combat gloves and motorbike gloves. Her body has the same silhouette as her original design. That's the biggest point of contention I want to make against everybody who's been bitching and complaining about her design. When you look at the original silhouette of the character, at least two in particular, the in-game combat one and the silhouette from the actual art books or the manual itself, that's the silhouette he's referring to. Not any of the others, because all of the others look weird and outdated, and they would never use those as the reference point to making Tifa. Those are the two silhouettes that they're using. Okay? Those are the silhouettes they're basing this game off of. Nothing else. So I'd really appreciate it if people would actually pay attention to that. So she's a one-for-one rendition of the silhouette that they used in the past. But we filled it out with details. So basically what they're saying is they added to the design from the original. They added more details. Like on her pleated skirt, you can see little skulls on it. She's wearing a chocobo charm, along with a mogul charm on one of her wrists. They've added to the details. The fact that she's wearing knee-high socks, or, whatever you want to call them. Those, the undershirt, which also, by the way, has been mentioned several times, is something that she's actually worn prior to this. So you guys are bitching about nothing. Her bust is large. Was there any specific consideration for that? First, we wanted her to have more defined abdominal muscles, so we leaned towards an athletic style. For her design. I want to preface this. So basically, the art team decided, hey, we want her to be more sporty and more athletic because she's a combat martial artist. So why don't we do that? That would probably also have influenced the choice in design to give her the black undershirt, basically a sports bra, so that she looks more like a fighter. Our ethics department had asked that we make sure that her top wasn't loose. So basically saying, don't let it just be a regular tank top, which is a very normal piece of clothing that someone can wear. Make sure the top wasn't loose, so therefore they had to tighten the top even more so. It wouldn't come off as unnatural during heavy action sequences. Keep in mind that this isn't a turn-based combat system anymore, it's action-based, so she's going to be moving around a lot more than she's ever moved before. Much like Cloud, much like Barrett, and everybody else, she's going to be moving around a lot more, which makes a lot more logical sense for her to have a sports bra on. And also to wear the spats underneath the skirt. Understandable changes. So we took her simplistic upper body clothing and added black undergarments and made it a tank top so that it fits her body well, resulting in a fit and sporty design. Simple, basic. End of discussion. End of the argument, basically, for the most part. Of course, people aren't going to see it that way, but that's kind of how I'm going to read it. It's like they didn't restrict it or anything. And Gaijin continues, it's like, if the character designer himself is saying that her silhouette matches the original design he had for her, then no arguments are valid. And I agree, 100%. None of your guys' arguments are valid. Anybody who's going to come in here or come to any comment or video and say that the original designer who says this matches her silhouette perfectly is going to basically tell him that he's wrong. What the hell? You guys are going to tell me that the guy who originally designed the character from 1997 is wrong when he says this silhouette is a match. I designed her the exact same way just with more detail and updated her. This is Tifa. This is the design that we made. It matches the original. And you're going to go to him, basically, and you're going to tell him. You're going to tell an artist how to draw. Now, you can critique it if you want. That's fine. But you can't tell me that you have an actual valid argument about this, because you don't. That sounded like a chopped up sentence. It sounds terrible. Anyway, I think my point is that it's okay to critique it, and it's okay to maybe even be upset by these changes if that's really a valid thing you want to do, or if you think it's worth your time. I know people are saying like, "Oh, I'm not gonna purchase this game because now herp derp derp." Chill out. But also at the same time, it's like you're free to do what you want. Just don't drag everybody else down with you and try and make it a bigger issue than it actually is. That would be the one thing I would wish. This is getting to the point of ridiculousness, helped not by the mistranslated article that said that he was forced to alter her body. That's kind of the biggest problem. When websites are giving false information or saying that he was forced to do it, or they're wording it in a way that makes it sound like it was forced. Please don't do that. Okay? Guys, please don't. If you're a website that is supposed to report news and facts and information, please do not do that. And also, he does a translation note for this particular word. It doesn't mean to shrink. It means to keep something fastened, secured, aka not flopping around, which would go against the idea that she is a fighter, as no fighter would use a loose top and have their chest get in the way. Yeah, that's a fair point. I wish media would contact someone who actually knows Japanese before they run with shrunk, toned down, etc. The interview was in Japanese, so make sure you understand it before spreading the word. He was ordered to, was also way off tone from the Japanese. And I'm going to take the word of Gaijin here over anybody else. Yeah, that I'm not sure personally what this particular word at the company does, which means the ethics board. My assumption is that it is a department that makes sure that things in their games are not unintentionally offensive in different countries. And that's also another point that I'd like to point out with this whole complaint about an ethics committee or an ethics board. When you're publishing your game in multiple locations, there's a very strong chance and possibility that certain gestures, certain words, and certain things can be considered offensive when translated to a different language or sent to a different country. This is a very real thing that big companies do need to consider when making a game or when making a movie or anything of that nature. Think about it this way. Think of like in China, like when The Force Awakens, or not The Force Awakens, but Force Awakens, when they had all the posters here in the States had Finn on the posters. In China, they didn't. And there's a very clear reason, because China doesn't like black people for some reason. I don't know why, but it seems as though they are relatively racist against black people. So he was removed because people in China find him offensive, I guess. I don't know. But these are things that happen. Yeah. And this person chiming in, I guess it's an internal auditing department that ensures games are compliant with various rating boards. And this has been now clarified by Square themselves, that basically meeting age ratings and whatnot, but some of these places like Niche Gamer and Bounding into Comics are still rolling with this whole shtick of it's wrong in some weird way, or that it's a little weird that they have an ethics department, or it feels like it's, an excuse, or that they're changing their words and whatnot. And I'm all like, oh, great. Here we go again. One side note, actually, real quick. I'm actually genuinely surprised that out of all the gaming sites that I've seen so far, Kotaku actually wrote an article that wasn't entirely cringe or cancer. Um, they actually did their job for once and actually reported on something instead of writing garbage hit pieces. Bravo to Kotaku. I would recommend maybe reading. Of course, you can. Of course, I would recommend that you go and read all the articles. I'll leave links down below to all of them. And this video may go a bit longer than I intended because I'm rambling, but there's a fair bit to cover, and I don't want to split it into like multiple different videos. But they did their own translation too, and when you read it, none of it is like tightened or restrictive. It was necessary to bind Tifa's chest. Necessary. Single upper body. And that's the thing. In Japanese, these things can be translated in more than one way. Or certain words can be translated differently. So there is always the potential that the words meant something different. So when someone comes in and actually translates it, it could mean something else. But like I said, I'd rather take the word of Gaijin Hunter over other people. Even this particular one from Kotaku, I'm not sure how accurate it is. I trust Gaijin Hunter a little bit more than I do these people. But let's go over to Niche Gamer's article. Confirm changes to Tifa's designs, which really wasn't that big of a deal. Final Fantasy VII Remake were due to their internal ethics department. He didn't say that. Nomura did not confirm that the changes were because of the ethics department. They said they consulted, basically, or that they talked to them, and they made a suggestion. Square Enix, talking to Polygon, a Square Enix representative explained that ethics department was to help game meet an anticipated age rating, which sounds like something that would make sense, don't you think? I'm just saying they need to be rated in the ESRB, and I know that these guys are going to be using several different games that have the same rating, but they're able to get away with a lot more. Yeah, that's very possible. I don't know what these boards are very different, and they can be very fickle. I don't know if it's based on how much money the company pays you or what they do and don't do to, skirt by and get away with something. Like, things like Soul Calibur are going to be used as a reference point because, things like Ivy and other characters are allowed to wear really skimpy outfits and whatnot, but the thing is, there are different standards for different games, and each ESRB board or the Creo or the PEGI boards are each different. So each one, rates games differently. Or at the very least, they'll put different information on it. One thing might fly in one country, one might not fly in the other. But the rule, and even then, I really don't know how much of the ESRB and whatnot is a set of rules or if it's a set of guidelines. I'm not really sure how the ins and outs entirely of them go, but from what I understand of it, it's a case-by-case basis, and it always has been. Each game's going to be rated differently depending on how the game is perceived by the ESRB, Creo, PEGI, all these things. I hear people complaining and saying like, oh, these things shouldn't exist. They're trash. They're garbage. They don't need to exist. And I'm like, really? There are standards for media for a reason, especially big media like games, because here's the thing. You want to know what happens if boards like this don't exist anymore? Who ends up having to regulate video games, movies, TV? It ain't going to be, their own personally made board to keep them in line. It's going to be the governments. And do you really want the governments? Do you want the US, the UK, or anybody else to tell you what you can and cannot do in a video game? I'm guaranteeing you don't. Because that's even worse. Because whenever legislation happens, when the government takes control, it gets even worse. So no, you don't want Because without these boards, guys, if these boards were to be wiped off the map, the government will step in. Because they have to, because somebody has to regulate, because if no one is regulating themselves in some form or another, they're going to step in, because then we're going to get those, those parents that are all like, why won't someone think of the children? Because those parents still exist. Those people still exist. They're going to cry, and then the government will step in to deal with the situation. Because it's not the ESRB and PEGI or CREO to deal. They're gone. A world without them means that, guess it's up to the government now to mandate what you and your kids can and cannot watch. Do you really want that, considering how out of touch they are with most of these entertainment medias? Anyway, despite this explanation, international rating boards seems to rarely have agreements on smaller details of age-appropriate content between them. Yeah, exactly, because each country is different. That's the point. Each of them are different. Each of them have different standards. What flies in one country won't fly in another. I don't know why I even have to explain this, but I'm explaining it anyway. It's so goddamn ridiculous. And yes, okay. They bring up WWE 2K16. Interesting, you're using an older game and not a newer one, but okay. Talking about pelvic thrusts and all these other things that happen in wrestling games. One, the characters are covered. Exaggerated breast size. Well, the breasts of mainline roster characters are, at least some of them are pretty well endowed. I wouldn't say they're exaggerated, because all of the characters are based on in-game models of the people who were scanned ahead of time. But wrestling has always been teen rated. It's never been mature rated, at least not for WWE, because none of their games have ever been that racy or questionable. They're skirting a very fine line. And if Square is going for a T rating, and the original Final Fantasy VII was teen rated, is it any wonder that this was going to be the case? You are never going to see jiggle physics in this game, guys. Okay? It was never going to happen. So shut up. It wasn't going to happen. Your expectations are very weird. Reminds us of the censorship of Street Fighter V in order to earn a T for teen rating. I'm not really sure on this. And it's kind of similar to YouTube's rules and guidelines, but theirs are even more vague than things like the ESRB and other rating boards are. The situation is very similar to that in a lot of ways. It's just that there isn't a board, or the guidelines are very vague and can be changed or manipulated or used against you. I would have really appreciated it more from, especially Bounding into Comics and Niche to it. I mean, Niche did mention in a tweet that they do try and make sure that the translations are up to par and make sure that, they're not giving misinformation. I appreciate the openness. I don't know who started the whole steamroll, but it's fair. I really wish that all of them would just kind of admit that they may have made a mistranslation, or at the very least their source, or a fair caveat for all of them, guys. Just potentially to add into your articles, the original articles, mind you, links to Gaijinhunters translations or somebody else's translations, just to prove that there may be other translations for the words that were said, at the very least. I think that that's a fair compromise to make sure that you guys aren't, caught with your pants down again. Always double check your sources. This is very important. And especially Bounding into Comics, considering that they got their information from Niche Gamer. You guys should have... I don't know if they double checked. I'm betting they didn't. Always double check, guys. Just always double check. And also, one other thing. I think this might be my last point that I leave off on. I find it very interesting that people who have cried for ethics or cried for, a higher standard of behavior, more professionalism, more ethical behavior, whether it be a comic book company, whether it be comic book writers or creators, whether it would be a video game developer, whether it's video game journalists. You guys ask for these things. You ask for a better standard. You want people to do a better job, and yet you yourselves are now complaining about an ethics department. You guys wanted more ethics. This is kind of what you get. These exist now. Ethics departments have probably existed at Square for years, and you guys never once complained. Also, I never seen any of you complain about Tifa's redesign and changes in Advent Children either, where it's very clear that this new character model, though it is a little bit younger than the Advent Children one, it's pretty similar to the Advent Children redesign. But no one ever complained back then. At least nobody who would care to point that out. I doubt anybody ever complained. But hey, we got to complain about it now because, that's a thing that has to happen. Sorry if there's banging, that's me hitting a thing underneath my feet. It's ridiculous. You guys could have just as easily just say, I'm not buying this game, and move on. But I don't want to be Nostradamus again. I don't want to do that, but I don't know. This could spiral again. This could crop up again. I'm certainly hoping it doesn't. You guys, Tifa is fine. There are plenty of other things to be more skeptical and concerned with the remake than Tifa. It feels like you're deflecting. Why aren't you guys talking more about the fact that the game is going to be on 2 Blu-ray discs? That it's episodic? That there could be other changes coming? Some of you mentioned the potential of other changes, but we don't know the extent of it yet. Why don't you guys focus on those concerns than Tifa? Because everyone is saying that Tifa is censored. She's not. Stop using that word. It's starting to become a buzzword now. Okay? If you're going to complain about censorship, complain about actual censorship. This isn't it. This is not the hill you should be dying on. Okay? Just stop. Full stop. Don't do that. Anyway, I'm done ranting about this. I'm done talking about this. I hope I don't have to come back again and put somebody in their place again or point out that they're stupid again. I really don't want to do that. But if I have to, I will, because Final Fantasy VII, like I've mentioned before, second favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, and I will defend this game and its remake until I see something that actually is more concerning. Anyway, that said, please as always do not forget to leave me a like, shoot me a comment, subscribe if you're new, tell me if I'm wrong, which I'm sure I might have made some mistakes in this video. Feel free to discuss it. I don't really mind. I want you guys to talk to me. I want to hear feedback. But, share the video. Point this stuff out to people if you're one of those people who believes that this isn't censorship, because it isn't censorship. Or at the very least, if you explain to me what parts of this is censorship. I would really like to know, because so far the arguments haven't even been valid. Especially if the creator himself is all like, this is her design, this is what I went with, I'm following my own original design. What more do you want? Do you want to have the guy's firstborn children while you're at it? Do you want him to, give you his kidney? He's giving you a remake. And like I've said on Twitter twice now, If this is what gets you to stop you from purchasing, if this is what pisses you off or upsets you enough, you're entitled, and you don't deserve this remake. That's just how I view it. If you're going to act this way, you don't deserve it. That's all I have. As always, do not forget to raise your nerd flags high, and I'll see you next time. Nightwolf is out. I'm indignant now. Bye.